Very, very welcome, everybody. And special welcome, Thomas, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And this is very, very special for this conversation. And to start with, everybody knows what 4D stands for? No? So 4D is dreamers, doers, designers, and doubters. Okay? And we have this community at Ericsson and had the pleasure to have you then at one for the conversation that Thomas really opened my mind. And first time I came across the concept of a meta crisis, and which then is the whole focus of the 4D community today. So the 4D community, if you read one sentence, what we are concerned with is to understand what is the meta crisis, right? And explore ways to how to mitigate it. Okay. And I just talked to you guys, and I think we all seeing all these signs and trying to make sense of what's going on. And this is basically the 4D community in a nutshell. And a very important part of the 4D community is these live conversations. So today we have a bunch of people also online, all across. I think we have nowadays all the way to Australia. That's good.
20 people so far.
Yeah, and but also all the way to California, and we have then two moderators, Peter and you, Björn. You're gonna check the.
I would keep track of the chat. And we will try to let people in from the word as well as people. So Peter and I will try to sync that.
Yeah. And just a sound check. How does it sound? You guys here online?
Just raise your thumb or whatever.
Yeah, sounds good.
Very, very good. And Thomas, you're going to present yourself also, but I leave the word to you.
Yeah, there's not much to add. We have a fantastic guest already in a line of long line of already fantastic guests. But Thomas, you stand out as a man that has you come from a very successful business background, but then I'm now just putting words in your mouth. You decided that there were more important things to maybe do in life. You're the author of several books, and it seems like what you're trying to attempt is to find ways forward to address the problems we see in the world, and also the importance of the responsibility also on the individual to actually grow and mature and reach their own potential, and in order to actually be able to create change. Is that a proper description?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So welcome to the stage, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the format for this evening, I believe, is a conversation. I will make a short introduction, just commenting a little bit on where I think we are today as humanity. And then there will be an opportunity for the moderators to initiate some discussion, and then we will take questions and just continue talking.
Exactly.
So I will try to be brief. But if you have any questions during my presentation, please ask them, and we might park them for later. So this is where we are today. The world is extremely difficult to make sense of. See if it's my computer that is.
No, it's people coming in.
Okay. Making it's extremely difficult to understand the world today and to make any sense of that. And that's the way it has been for a very long time. And this development is just accelerating for every year. But it looks like right now something is happening in many different ways. So, for example, we have this explosion in AI and other technologies that is really now speeding up to a speed that we could not have imagined, not even 2 years ago. And then on top of that evolution of the technology, we have the geopolitical evolution that is happening right now around us. So DeepSeek happened, was it 3 weeks ago now, 4 weeks ago? And this happened during the weekend. So during the weekend, the geopolitical landscape in the world, and especially for Europe, completely shifted. We'll come back to that. So my life has very much circled around trying to make sense of the world. First, I did that by studying physics and mathematics, and I thought that I would become an engineer or a physicist, trying to understand the world from a natural science perspective. Then I became a serial entrepreneur in property and IT and in banking. And it was really during my banking years that I started to understand the importance of leadership. And I was working together with some very talented leadership development consultants when I was the chairman of a small banking group in Scandinavia, who showed me and my management team the importance of not just lifelong learning, but also about inner growth and inner development. And they took me and my management team on a developmental journey that helped us certainly function better in our corporate environment, but also for many of us meant that it was changing our private lives. And it also, at least for me, opened up my eyes for the bigger questions and for the longer perspectives. And that made me take the decision to, after I sold my banking business, to start the foundation, Ekberg Foundation, some 15 years ago. And I did that together with Claes, who's there, from the very, very start. And many of you have been out at Ekberg, but very briefly, what we are doing there is in the summer, we are doing youth camps for children. And then during the rest of the year, we do retreats and invitational conferences. I've written or been involved with a few different books, and the book that I will be mostly talking about today, or from today, is The World We Create, a book that I started writing 20 years ago and finished writing years ago. And someone asked me just before, does it hold up? And unfortunately, my answer is yes. Many of the things that I will be mentioning in my short presentation is in the book, and we are right now living through those events as history evolves. Okay, so back to the crisis. If we should try to understand why the world is so difficult to understand today, I would try to analyze it from 3 different dimensions. And of course, you can do this in 100 different ways, but for me, it makes sense to start with 3. And of course, the first one is the technological development that we already mentioned. And the technological development is on an exponential curve. And we've been talking about for 10 years at least that this technological rapid change is creating a world that is full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But I think that we have now, and I think this is something that many of us have started to realize just during the last half a year, that this exponential curve might actually very soon become asymptotical, meaning that we are coming closer and closer to what some people are talking about, the singularity, where the technological development will more or less fuel itself. It will explode like an atom bomb, and what will be the roles of humans in that situation. Some 10 years ago, when Kurzweil introduced the concept of the singularity, I didn't believe that I would see the singularity in my lifetime. 5 years ago, my guess would have been that we were perhaps 20 years away. 3 years ago, 10 years away. Now, there are even people speculating that this might be the year 2025 when it actually happens. I don't think so, but I definitely think that it's within 5 years. That's my best estimate. And of course, it's not just AI, but many of the technology that we have today, we are tinkering with as humanity in a very dangerous way. And of course, we should remember that the technological development has given us all these wonderful gifts. So I'm basically technological positive. I mean, where would we be without penicillin and modern medicine and energy generation and all of that? We wouldn't want to go back 100 years in time in technological development. But at the same time, at the moment, we are in a very, very dangerous situation because we do not have the international governance to control the technological development. It is on its own independent developmental journey right now. So technological development is one dimension of understanding what's going on and the rapid change there. The next one is, of course, the geopolitical shift that we are seeing today. And for all of these dimensions, you can really ask yourself, yes, we are in a shift, but how deep is the shift? How deep is the shift? And when it comes to the technological development, we could talk about that later, and I would be interested in hearing what you all believe, how deep the shift that we are in. But we are, of course, at least at the level of the Industrial Revolution. But some might even argue that we are on a level of the invention of language or even the taming of fire. It might be such a fundamental shift for humanity. The same about the geopolitical shift that we are living through right now. And when I say right now, it is this week, this weekend. And how deep is this shift? Well, I would argue that it is at least as deep as going back to the aftermath of the Second World War and the creation of the world institutions that become more and more marginalized. But you could also argue that this could be a Westphalian movement going back and redrawing the relationship between international actors like we did in the Westphalian peace 1642. And just picking up a meme from my TikTok feed this morning about the role of Europe in this shift that we are going through right now. Will this mean that Europe is placed at the children's table going forward, or will we rise to the occasion and coordinate our action to still be relevant for the big geopolitical game? And then after the technological development and the geopolitical shift, I would put in a shift in fundamental worldview. And perhaps this could be new to you. I think most of us today are very aware about the technological shift and the geopolitical shift. But humanity has gone through a number of fundamental shifts in worldview. And I believe that we are in such a fundamental shift again. And I will come back to that in a minute. But when we're talking about this shift in worldview, how deep is that? Well, I would say that it is at least as deep as the shift when we went from the pre-modern world before the Enlightenment, a world dominated by religion and dogma, and into the modern scientific worldview that is still dominating our world today in many ways, even if one of the fundamental problems we have in the world today is that that modernistic worldview is in many ways rightly challenged by postmodern way of thinking of the world. But this challenge of this postmodern challenge of the modern world is also creating a lot of problems. So this mess that we are in, some people are calling this a polycrisis, indicating that we have a lot of different crises going on at the same time, and we certainly have that. We certainly have a lot of crises going on at the same time. Some people are talking about this as a perma-crisis, meaning that we have entered into a world where we are constantly in some sort of crisis. And that might also be true. But just as Geraldo mentioned, I think that a better way to understand what's going on is to talk about a meta-crisis. And what do I mean by a meta-crisis? Well, I mean by that these crises are not just random and sort of happening at the same time, that there are some underlying causes to this, to all of these crises. And what might that be? Well, I think one way of saying it, and you can say this in many ways, that we have exhausted our present capacity, both as individuals and as a collective, to understand and act in the world. And this can be expressed in many ways, but you could say that the core challenge to individuals, organizations, and society today is that the increasing complexity in our outer worlds has to be matched by an increase in psychological resources of our inner world, both individually and collectively. This will not be enough, but it is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Another way to talk about this, I picked this up from the Center for Humane Technology, that is Tristan Harris' organization. He's talking there about the increasing complexity of issues and the decreasing capacity to respond. And not the least, the decreasing capacity to collectively respond. Individually, we can respond to a certain extent, but we seem to be, at least in the West, decreasingly capable of organizing collective response. And the Center for Humane Technology is referring to this as the wisdom gap. As this is a very qualified audience tonight, I want to introduce 4 concepts that I usually don't speak about. I want to introduce the concept of a complex dynamic system, of a phase shift or a bifurcation point, attractor points, and the concept of emergence. And I will use these terms that come originally from complex dynamics studied in physics. But this thinking can also be applied on social systems or biological systems or any systems. And when you have a complex evolving system, whether it is a physical system, a biological system, or a social system, you have the fact that when the complexity increases, you can have situation where you have a linear development of the system, adapting to more and more complexity and more and more pressure, more and more energy. But then you come to a point where linear development is not possible any longer, and you have a phase shift. You come to a bifurcation point where the system either breaks down or shifts up in complexity. And the way that the system can develop after coming to such a bifurcation point, we call those different possible states for attractor points. And another way to see it is if you're stepping up in complexity of such a complex system, you have emergence, meaning that the new system will have capacities that you cannot derive from the components of the system. Something completely new will emerge. And a typical example there is, of course, the emergence of life out from chemistry. So if we apply this thinking a little bit on the present situation that we are in, and looking at this shift in society, this shift in Western culture, the Western civilization, and possibly the whole global civilization, we can use a model that is called the Berkana model, where we are looking at an old paradigm, an old system, and then shifting into a new system, and the different steps that you could dissect this into. And just to understand this model, we can look at the last time we had a huge paradigm shift in the Western society, and that was during the Enlightenment. And then, of course, the old paradigm was the medieval religious paradigm that had its peak perhaps in the 12 or 1300s. And then technological development happened. You had, for example, the printing press, not just the printing press, but many other things happened, and that created an instability in the system. You reached a bifurcation point. And the system went into turbulence. You had the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and Europe was in turmoil for at least 50 years. But then out of that came a new system, a new paradigm, and that is, of course, what we today call modernity. And if we look at that as a graph, we have a system that is developing more or less linearly, come to a bifurcation point, and then you will see either a breakdown or complexity, a fragmentation of the system, or a step up in complexity. And here would be the attractor points, the different possible states afterwards. If we apply this to where we are today, then of course the old paradigm is modernity. That perhaps had its peak here in Scandinavia in the 70s or perhaps 80s. And then again, technological development happens. Internet, just not internet, now artificial intelligence on top of that. And that creates a turbulence. And the question is, what will come out on the other side of this turbulence? And going back to this graph again, we could say, leading up to a point, to this bifurcation point. And when I was giving this presentation, or this part of the presentation, some 2 years ago, I thought that this sort of bifurcation point was at least 10 years away, and we would actually have some time to prepare for it, even if the world did and other things was shaky 2 years ago. I still hope that we would have a bit of time. But I don't think we have some 10 years. I think this point is very, very close now. And what can happen? Well, I can see 3 attractor points here. We can enter into a complete breakdown of the international system, perhaps breakdown even of bigger nation states, breakdown of Europe certainly, but also countries within Europe might break down. We will be in everyone's war against everyone. So that's sort of the worst case scenario. I hope that won't happen. Then you have another possibility, and that is that after not going down completely, but going down through turbulence and then picking up a little bit, and you do that by central control, some sort of oppression, some sort of oppressive system. Could be state communism or something like that, but it could also perhaps more likely be some sort of techno-feudalism or something like that. But still an enforced order into the chaos. The challenge is, of course, to see if there could be a third attractor, to use Daniel Schmachtenberger's words. Can we see a third attractor? And what would a third attractor look like? What would a global civilization look like that is a step up in complexity, but might even look more elegant? Because when you step up in complexity, what comes out very often is something that is more complex, but also more elegant and simple in some ways. And again, you can look at, for example, from chemistry, from a chemical mess, you have life emerging. And life is infinitely more complex than this chemical mess, but it's also much more elegant in some way. Okay, so I don't know, but it's an interesting question to ask. What can we do to influence this situation? And we are right now rapidly going into a period of chaos. And that is necessary for this to happen. There has to be some chaos. But the question is, how deep will this chaos be? And then this chaos will have the possibility for, but not necessarily give rise to, but it has got the possibility for emergence. And that's where my hope is. That after this chaos, there might be something coming out. Just like, again, when the old religious medieval world collapsed, French Revolution, Napoleonic Wars, whatever. But what came afterward was something completely new that nobody could have foreseen. And you had new institutions, new way of working. It was not the old institutions. I feel a little bit like at least a year ago, this comparison would hold true. I said sometimes that it feels a little bit like we are 2 years ahead or 5 years ahead of the French Revolution. We're sitting in Paris. Some of the Enlightenment philosophers have written, we understand that the new world is possible. How shall we do? How can we give birth to this new world? And it would be natural if we would have said, well, we need to gather all the nobility. We need to gather all the nobility because they have the economic power. So we need to get the dukes and the counts and the marquises together, and let's get them to understand what's going on. And then we need to get the church, all the bishops, because they are in charge of our education and our worldview and whatever. So let's get them together. And then we have a conference, and then we try to do something. And of course, that's not what happened. And today, we still have the nobility. Here in Sweden, we still have a king. We have some dukes as well, some counts. But they're completely marginalized. Again, we have the church, but the church is not what informs of our worldview today. So I could feel sometimes that we are doing the same mistake again, saying that we need to get all the corporations, big corporations around the table, and we need to get all the politicians to understand whatever. In 50 years from now, we might still have corporations, we might still have politicians, but they might be as marginalized as nobility and the churches today. So what can we do? vocabulary. Well, I sometimes use the metaphor that it's like building bridges into the fog. We don't know what's there. We don't even know if there is any, but we still need to try. And we need to be agile, and we need to try and fail quickly, try again and fail quickly. And then finally, something could come out. But it's very important to understand that when you have these complex dynamic systems, and when you have emergence, per definition, you can never know what's coming out of the other side. There is no chance. And once you are on the other side, you cannot deride, not even afterwards, explain how this came about using the knowledge of the previous system. It's like trying to explain life from chemistry. You cannot do it. You need a new way of seeing the world for life, and that's called biology. Having said that, we don't know where we're going. So we cannot manage this. We cannot plan it. We cannot get all the corporations and politicians in a room and try to have a plan for this. But is there any way to increase the odds of a breakthrough rather than a breakdown? That is for me the key question to ask. Is there any way to increase the odds of a breakthrough than a breakdown? And I think there are. I think there are many ways to increase the odds. And you can see that again from physical systems and biological systems and from the evolution, that the conditions for emergence have to be there for it to happen. And to finish with just mentioning a bit of what I'm doing today and what I'm engaging in order to increase the odds. So I think one way to increasing the odds is to build capacity. Is to build capacity for individuals and for collectives. And what do I mean by building capacity? Well, one of the preconditions for a positive emergence, a step up in complexity rather than a breakdown, even going back to biological systems and physical systems, is to increase the ability for the individual components of the system to interact in more complex way. If the components of the system can interact in more complex way, that increases the odds of emergence and self-organization on a higher level. And in a social system, of course, the components of that system are us individuals. So can we build our capacities in different ways to relate to ourselves, to each other, to society, and to the planet in deeper ways? That, I believe, is one factor, perhaps a small factor, but still a factor that can increase the odds. And the second one is to create spaces and networks to support emergence, to make these different components of the system to meet in new way and meet other parts of the system that might not have been in contact with other parts of the system before, and to try to facilitate such meetings. And if we just start looking at the first one a little bit, so I've been involved in two projects there, one called Aware, which is a non-profit digital platform for inner growth and development. And the other is the initiative called Inner Development Goals that I know that many of you have been involved with. So just a few words on the Inner Development Goals. We have a summit in Stockholm here in October. It was the third Stockholm summit where we gather 1,500 people for 3 days from all over the world physically, and another 7,000 digitally, asking the fundamental question, in what way can we build inner capacities in order to meet the challenges of society better? We have today 700 hubs all over the world in more than 90 countries asking that same question. What can we do to increase our capacities individually, but also collectively? not the least collectively. Jan Henriksson, who is the executive director of the project, and I had the opportunity to visit the White House. We were not invited by Trump. It was in the last days of the Biden administration, but at least that shows that there is an interest in looking at these capacity building questions from highest political area. Having said that, politicians might be obsolete in this transition, but still there is some interest from the old system. Another interest from the old system, just curiosa, but still funny, it's from the Vatican. So the Vatican has developed a brochure, a small report. 2025 is a jubilee year. Every 25 years in the Catholic Church, it's jubilee year, and they're expecting a lot of pilgrims to Rome. So they developed this material in 5 languages, and in that material they are using the IDGs, and they are bringing up the different dimensions, all 5 of them, and saying this is what the IDG says about being, and this is what Pope Francis says about being. This is what the IDGs are saying about. This is what Pope Francis said, and referring to his encyclical Laudate Si, etc., etc. So at least what we are doing here is to find a language that is creating some sort of resonance within the old system. And then, of course, you can ask yourself, okay, is it a good or a bad? Is this good or bad news that it's creating resonance within the old system? Is this cementing the old system, or is it helping the old system wake up to capacity building that might eventually transform the system? So don't know. The jury is out. So that was on capacity building. And then just finishing on creating spaces and networks to support emergence. I mentioned when we were talking here a little bit before that we have had these international emerge gatherings. 4 of them. We had one first in Berlin, then in Kiev before the war, and then back in Berlin. And the latest one was in Austin, Texas, where we've been gathering 150 or 200 people from very, very different backgrounds, but all interested in asking this question: how can we support? How can we create the conditions for a positive emergence? And the idea there has really been to make people that are somehow contributing to these questions, but would normally not meet, to have them meet. And that means that we could have and approach a little bit, we might even have learned from Telberg that bring people that come from very different backgrounds. So we've had artists, philosophers, we have had business people, we have had psychologists, we have had spiritual people, religious people, all sort of trying to meet. And at every one of these events, there has, and I see this as a positive sign, because at every one of these events, there have always been some people coming up to me and saying like, Thomas, what are these people doing here? How could you invite those? I don't want to be in the same room as them.
And you were like, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. And then what we are trying to do right now is in Sköndal, we are renovating an old deacons convent, Sköndal Stiftelsen, Ersta Sköndal. They have had education of Christian deacons, and this building has been empty for 5 years, and we are trying to create some sort of living, working, learning, developing together. It might be a modern or a meta-modern version of the folkhögskola, you could say, having people staying there for 6 months up to perhaps 3 years. Again, having a group of people, and that's where we call it the Emerge Stockholm campus, it's the same idea, gathering a group of very diverse but highly motivated and highly engaged people to not just meet for a long weekend as we do at the Emerge gatherings, but to live together for 6 months or 1 year or more. And we are just in the starting phase here, so we hope that this is something that might be up in a very small scale at the beginning of the autumn. So, thank you.
Thank you. No doubt. So when you sort of like started with describing your life journey, that foundation that you got from studying theoretical physics, I feel like you closed the loop here, applying a lot of the lessons made in there and that way of thinking into also framing what is happening right now. And I found it both very succinctly and clear descriptions of like mapping out that, and very also useful. So like you get new glasses to view the world through, or lenses to view the world through. So thank you again. Do we have any questions from the audience here? Sorry, make a short comment.
I definitely have a question.
Yeah, the very short comment and say yes to the people that I'm usually interacting with, that they are usually not coming from theoretical physics. So that's one contribution that I make into the discussions, having that perspective. Another perspective that is not very, very common. It's becoming a little bit more common, but I would want to raise that as well. And that is big history or deep history. Taking, not as we usually do, 100 years or a couple of 100 years, but taking thousands of years, 10,000s of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and even billions of years. Because I think that we can see a pattern in the evolution of the universe, the evolution first of matter, then of life, then of consciousness, and then of culture. And it's the same, the pattern is repeating itself. It's just different material. And one of the big questions that I have at the moment is if we are right now in an at the exact moment of an equally big shift in the evolution of the universe. Meaning that we had matter for billions of years, then we had life for billions of years, some sort of consciousness for hundreds of millions of years, and then human culture for perhaps 100,000 or 50,000 years. And right now with AI, will that edge of the evolution shift from human culture into silicon? And I wouldn't bet on it, but I would give more than 10% chance that we are living through that movement this year in the evolution of the universe. And if not this year, within the next 5 years.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I guess a thought that I've had is sort of like that. Maybe if we view the humanity as the combination of genes, it's sort of like it may be a dead end for the genes finally, because it will all be silicon.
Yeah.
But you won.
Yes, I have so many questions, as someone used to say. One, you talked about the singularity, right? And I think that is a litmus test for us, because I come from the tech type of industry, and many of us do. And exponential growth and the singularity is sort of the holy grail for a lot of people. So my question is sort of, is the singularity when we level up as humanity to something much better? Or is the singularity the brick wall where we finally face the Fermi paradox?
It looks like a bifurcation point in a sense.
Yeah, but
if you connect it to bifurcation, is it really a bifurcation point, or is it sort of when we meet the singularity, is there predestination? That's what sort of. Will we crash or will we never?
And for those who are not familiar with Kurzweil, language and the singularity, or even the mathematical
Yeah.
thing of a singularity. How would you describe what does he mean by the singularity?
There's many meanings, right? One is that, oh, we'll grow exponentially, so everything that we had today, you can't forget because everything will be much better. But the physical meaning is that beyond the singularity, you can't see, right? You don't know what beyond the singularity. So that's why I think the singularity is a false analogy to some extent. Does that make sense? But my real question probably is the singularity where we meet the Fermi paradox, i.e. the explanation why Taylor shades why we don't see any manifestations of it.
I think that if we stay with the technical definition, Kurzweil's definition of singularity, meaning that, and for me, he's only talking about technology. He's not talking about humanity or the relationship between technology and humanity. The singularity happens when the technological development takes on a life of its own, and it goes exponentially fast. One way of thinking of this, just to take it down from a mathematical terms of exponential growth and singularities, ask yourself the following questions. How many completely different technological worlds have you experienced in your life? How many completely different technological worlds have you experienced in your life? And when I say completely different, I mean that they are so different that you need to manage your business in a completely different way. And it might even be that you manage your private life in a completely different way. It's not the same life, it's a new life. So can I get some examples? So yes.
One.
Yeah. Okay.
Personal computer, digital, before, after the computer.
Before.
I'm old enough to remember a little bit what it was like before.
Okay, good. Before and after the computer. Yeah.
I have more than one for sure.
Yeah.
I was brought up in a small society near Australia, in a small island.
Yeah.
No electricity. So for me, it's like, yeah, and electricity came up then. Oh, yeah, there's something new. And then, yeah, I was doing typewriting using the old typewriting machine, and then suddenly computer came in.
Yeah.
And then that's another step as well. Right now, I'm a CEO of a tech startup. You're using AI and machine learning.
Yeah.
And I don't really need to hire a lot of people because then I can use all these new things, right? So automate a lot of things.
Yeah.
So at least for me, that's like 4 different stages or bifurcation, maybe use the term in order to highlight just the steps of success.
So raise your hands.
Okay.
How many had 2 different worlds? 1 point, yes. 1 there. 2, 3, 4, 5.
Depending on how you count.
Depending on how you count. But in my life, a little bit like you. I grew up in Sweden. I grew up very much on my grandparents' farm.
Yeah.
In the beginning of the 60s. I'm born 58. In the beginning of the 60s. There was no hot water and no toilet inside, no television. At my parents' home, we had no telephone. So I remember the sort of life before and after telephone. Okay, so that's big. And then you have before and after mobile phone, and you have before and after computer. But also computer came way before internet.
Yeah.
Before and after internet. Smartphone. So we have many of these things, and they're coming quicker and quicker and quicker. So now going to the singularity. What is the singularity? Well, the singularity is that, say that it used to be every 10 years. We had a new world. Now it's every 5 years. So it will be every year. Then it will be every month. Then it will be every minute. But then you're close to the singularity. When every minute the world is changing. So the world is completely different. Okay. What happens then? what happens then? And your question, what will be the role of humanity? And we will be standing on the side. This will happen without us. So that's the starting point. That is when this becomes independent.
Without
Yes,
us,
but
exactly.
when this happens, also physically, the physical world breaks down.
Oh, now we're getting very, very philosophical here. And that's why I have this illustration here. I mean, we are holding the thing, we're holding the potential singularity here, and we still are a little bit in control, but we have no governance systems internationally to keep the control. So it could just explode.
It's without us, that's the thing also.
So what will happen? And again, per definition and with singularity, we don't know. Will humanity still be there? Will we still be relevant? What will happen?
Or maybe we merge into something like something else, into
I know.
And I just want to take this back again to reality. 5 years ago, I could have this discussion and find it amusing and interesting to think about. Yeah,
Now you're there, sort of like.
Now I'm afraid.
Yes.
Yeah, this makes me uncomfortable.
And now you see also what happens when you ask Thomas a question. So I know we have some more here.
And we have some questions
Yeah, so
here.
but let's take one from online.
Yeah, so I think the first one that
Yes.
had Just couldn't raise his hand. I think he was first. So Just, it's your turn.
Yeah. Would love to ask a question. I'm super curious. Of course, you have the geopolitical shifts, and I'm quite curious to hear a little bit more about your work with the church. So do you think the church can actually, how do you say, capture these technological advancements and play a role again? So my question is I really like this inner development goals. I'm very happy to hear that the church is interested in it. And I'm just really curious if they are getting in a more progressive mindset to, let's say, re-win the hearts of people all over the globe, and can they become a force again? That would be my question.
So my simple answer there is.
Could you repeat the question?
Okay. So will the church become relevant again? That's this essentially. And especially then referring to my argument that the inner world is going to be important. The inner world is playing a role here. The shift that we are going through is not just out there; it's also in there. And of course, it's just one shift. But we have tended to in modernity not to integrate the inner parts of this total system. So then that used to be the turf of the church. So will the church become more relevant again? And I was just about to give the very simple answer that I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. And I am myself non-religious. I have even called myself an atheist. And I have no deep relationship with any church. I just find it interesting that the language resonates with some church, and not just the Vatican. Even the Svenska kyrkan, the Church of Sweden has used the IDGs in an educational material as well, and finding it let's call it a contemporary way of approaching the questions of our inner life. So I don't know if anybody else here in the room has got any ideas on where the church is in this.
I have a comment, and that is, I think, at least to me, it seems like there is sort of like a shift happening with people that maybe are secular, but still are finding sort of like realizing that you need something on the spiritual side. And that ties very also into the inner development, I think. So I think there's some hope to see that the awareness of the need for that is actually increasing, but that's just a very random point.
Yeah, I think to the point of this religion and religious view of this, I think they are the one who actually can easily embrace this new thing, because I mean, to us, let's say to an atheist, or to us right now in the modern secular world, these AI things is almost like depiction of God to the religious society in the past. So they have the capacity to admire so a powerful being beyond their control. And I think we are going into that path as well, that maybe, I mean, the religious society, a little bit easier for them to understand what's happening right now because of the relationship with God that they have.
There are plenty of sci-fi books covering that. I think you were before.
Maria?
One sentence here, so I'm not misunderstood. So I definitely recognize that one of the problems with modernity is that we have completely put away anything around the spiritual dimension. Yeah, the existential dimension, and that was actually a conscious decision by some of the Enlightenment philosophers that they didn't want to get in a fight with the church, so they just said, and this guy was one of them, saying that if it's about the inner world that we leave to the church, we are looking at the outer world.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah, thanks very much for all of these very interesting thoughts and your positive, so to say, tentative conclusion.
Because he's scared. He's scared.
But it's
Scared, uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable.
And I was intrigued by your picture of the play Adults, Children and the Children's Table. Because I belong to those that think that the European Union has risen in crisis. The 2008 financial crisis is one such example, even of course it didn't start in the EU, but okay. This is a bigger one, much more challenging, and it's happening, as you said, as we speak. But I believe the EU will find alliances with new partners. Canada, who knows about China? I think that's a very big unknown right now because China, it's an enemy of the US. Yeah, I'm just throwing this out, but I sincerely believe that. So I'd be a bit more optimistic about the children's table than I understood you were. But I don't know if I misunderstood you or if this was more of a TikTok illustration.
Yeah. No, I put it there because I think that for me the big question for Europe right now is, will Europe be relevant in 5 years or not? And I think it could go either way, and for Europe not to be relevant, so something very serious needs to happen. And the question is if we can make that happen. And when I say that, it's not just a lack of will or ability of the politicians, but really we are seeing the same forces in Europe, of course, divisive forces as we have seen in the US. So it might not even be politically possible within the present democratic system and EU system in Europe to respond to this. We would have needed more time. The institutions are too slow. But I don't know. I give it 50-50.
In a sense, that picture actually made me think now when I think back on it is what you're saying. In a sense, you could also view actually Europe as they are the adults. They have not just realized that the kids have taken over now and then play adults. And hopefully we'll raise to the occasion actually meet up with that. I think we haven't understood really how differently.
That's very good. And Europe has right now possibility to be the adults in the room.
Yeah.
It's just that the kids or the teenagers that they are running around. They are running around with guns.
Yeah, exactly.
Guns, and we stopped practicing on the firing range 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
People didn't do this. Yeah, yeah, I get it. Do we have an online question before?
So actually, the next was actually Geraldo, but I think
I think you were first, way back. Actually.
Yeah, exactly. So I missed.
Not so way back. But
okay.
Yeah.
I was interested in if you could expand a little bit on the notion of complexity, because for me, I feel in the graph that you showed, I feel that the problem, one of the problems with modernity is complexity. And I feel that the way forward wouldn't be increased complexity, but rather my intuition would be that a decrease in complexity would be a way forward. But I would be interested in hearing a little bit more, if you could expand.
Yes. Let me do that. Just to expand a little bit on that. Yeah, the complexity, the way I use it is a very abstract concept, and it has got it is well defined within complexity science. So the concept of complexity is not, as we usually use the word in everyday life, saying, "Oh, my life is so complex." So it's a bit dangerous to use that word, and that's why I usually add, which I think I did now as well, that it might be more complex, but also more beautiful or more elegant.
Right.
More beautiful and more elegant. And sometimes we said, coming to this world, a really good third attractor to me, what would that feel like, that world? It would certainly not feel more complex. So if you would try to find for yourself the world here that our hearts know is possible, what would it feel like to be in that world?
A better system as
It would,
such.
I mean,
it would
I'm
be
looking
like,
forward, actually.
like
Because of the options are not really.
I mean, well, let me comment as also a former theoretical physicist. Maybe I can comment. So first of all, I think what you're depicting there is the switch to what we called before under the discussion on metastability, correct? Because it's a new, so it's a stable situation. It's a complex, stable situation. And one more thing that you said, which brings me back to the life comparison, is that what's beautiful about life is that it's self-organizing. And that is actually going back to what you're saying, is that we need to create an environment that is self-organizing in a way that puts us to this beautiful third attractor. Because to me, you can't do it from by steering. Then you're just going down the other slope. So if we can self-organize, I mean, the self-organization, which happens in life and happens in many complex systems, you might have small nucleus, many nuclei going into something new. I think that is what we are after, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And just to add one more layer there on complexity to this, what you said is absolutely true when we are looking at a physical system,
Yes,
or even a system of life. But now this system, we are humans.
Yeah.
And we humans are agents in this self-organization.
exactly.
So we cannot just sit on the bench and look at it.
No.
Because part of the fact that it can self-organize on a high level will be our ability to take decision and to judge and to talk about it and to create culture.
Yes.
And all of those things.
Exactly.
So we will be there, we will be active, we will be making decisions, hopefully from some sort of deeper consciousness level,
Yes.
making decisions, but it will not happen without us.
No.
And at the same time, we cannot plan it and we cannot steer it. That's the paradox.
Hence where the title comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. We're forgetting that we are creating the world.
You have raised your hand here.
Yeah, I just want to add to this complexity, not to complicate things, but please remember, back in October, I think it was early in November, we had Adam Rosen
Exactly.
talking, and he introduced a very useful concept called complexity denial. In his context, it was very often from organizations that they try to solve things in an engineering way, sort of like finding the solution to something. because they don't want to see the complexity. They want to reduce it into something that you can solve for. But the approach here you're suggesting, we cannot solve for it, according to a specific step of solutions. We need to try a lot of things and evolve. And so complexity denial is very, I think, a very useful term.
Per definition, if we talk about emergence, we do not know if there is something there.
Yeah.
We don't even know that there is something there. I just wanted to conclude that for me, this third stage here, I think if I went into that world, it would feel like coming home.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coming home.
So Geraldo,
Yeah,
we have.
I have two questions, Thomas. One that's not so complex, and another one, if I start with the first one, the last 4-day conversation with Mayan was on migration. And it made a really, how to say, mark on me, because I had forgotten that I came to Sweden 30 years ago and so we are driving some stuff in this area as part, anyhow. But then there is a question, is migration, the first question then, is migration part of the meta crisis? Some people would argue that's not, but what's your view? So the first question. The second question is, I don't know if, as you are having these meetings places, I mean, Kluster is one, and Sharit also, and you had others. So in your book, it's about we, so it's so important, we. But I'm having a hard time now to how to put that. I see more and more that people are a little bit tired with all these things that are going on or whatever. So if you remember this discussion with Harry Minsberry, so he talked even about the pre-mortgage and after-mortgage generation, because everything in the middle, people just worried with the day-to-day life, right? So the question at the end is, how will you manage this dilemma to get the people that at the end maybe can come to the third factor? Understand the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Was it a challenge for you too?
But I think that this, of course, and especially during the last 6 months. I mean, 6 months or 6 weeks. The world is spiraling so totally out of control, and I had hoped that we would have had another 10 years of capacity building. But at some point, I think we just need to lean into what is happening and to go with the flow. I mean, trying to resist too much might be when we are dragged into the vortex. I mean, before the vortex, you can prepare, you can do things, but now I think we probably start going so fast that relax into it.
Be like water.
Yeah.
You first, I think, and then.
Yeah, 2 questions, comments. The first is around the we in the world we create. Quite a lot of the vortexes that comes from people who would rather say that I live in the world that they created, that they created, not me, regardless of if I'm, my Indian friends who say, well, if you created my world, the Trump voters who say someone else created my world. So could you expand a little bit on the we in that respect? The second question is your beautiful picture of crossing the bridge in the fog. There's an old Chinese expression saying that you feel the stones under your bare feet as you cross the river, like when you're walking in Sadek and you have to cross the river. Now, imagining that it's dark, imagining that it's fog, imagining that you don't even know how deep the river is or if there is another side, then there is one thing that keeps you going, and that's hope. Or trust in yourself, trust in Tranströmer, the blind den blinda ledstången som hittar i mörkret. Those kinds of things. And that kind of very, trust, the trust that you carry, the hope that you carry in me, in yourself. How would you connect that to the work that you've been doing on inner development? Is that really a trust and hope-seeking exercise?
Are we talking about faith?
You can call it faith as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. Faith, trust, hope.
Yeah.
That area.
Okay.
So two comments.
Two complex questions. So when it comes to the we, I can only answer that for the title of my book, what I mean by we there. And that we is quite simple, and that is just every one of us. And whether we are aware of it or not, we are all recreating and creating the world. With every act we do, with every thought, with every act, we are either recreating the already existing world, or we are creating something new. And that we need to wake up to that fact, that we are all doing that in whatever capacity, even if it's just sort of emptying the dustbins or talking to your children at night or whatever. I mean, you don't need to be on the world stage to create the world. We are all creating the world. That's one of the messages in the book. And realizing how completely interconnected the whole world is. Completely interconnected. So you can never separate yourself from that, even if we often do that. And I think that is just very human, because that has been helpful through evolution to understand the world, not by seeing us as completely interconnected, but actually separating things. And even separating in family members, other families, enemies, and so on. So it's very natural to distance ourselves from other people and other world, but realizing the interconnectedness, and however small our impact we might believe that we have in the world, we are creating the world, every one of us. So that's one. Then the next question is more difficult. And I sometimes ask myself the question, why am I doing what I'm doing, and what is keeping people around me going? And yes, and I'll going back to the religious or the spiritual aspects of, or the existential aspects of life. I'm connecting it to the we here. When you wake up to the fact that, again, in whatever capacity you are acting as a human, you are part of the creation of the world. Then it's only a small step to realize that this evolutionary force that has been active in the universe since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, there has been some sort of active evolutionary creative force that has been working against the other forces of the universe. For example, the entropy and the famous second law of entropy of the thermodynamics, entropy, saying that over time every system breaks down. Every system breaks down. There's another force acting locally, building something up. And that force is somehow acting through all of us humans. And at least on a good day, I can be in contact with that force. And that somehow gives me hope. And it gives me hope in humanity. And some might say that this might be a too anthropocentric view, and even a bit megalomaniac view, putting humans somewhere. But I mean, in the creation of what's happening on the earth, we live in Anthropocene now. I mean, we have the impact. So yes, the evolutionary force is acting in many, many ways on the earth, but it's also acting through us humans, and we humans are the only ones who can actively decide what we want to do with that.
And the growth of knowledge is very difficult for us to predict in the future as well.
Yeah.
So I don't really rule out that we can actually. I mean, that's the positivism point of view, that I always believe that, you know, it's just a matter of knowledge, how we grow the knowledge as quick as possible in order to solve our problem.
Yeah, but I must just qualify my answer a little bit, so I don't sound too deterministic or too or optimistic here as well. But I think I can live with the fact that in the evolution of complex systems, most systems break down. Most systems fail. Most systems break down. It's a random walk in many cases. Can we use our mind to reduce the randomness or skew the odds for an emergence rather than a breakup? Perhaps a little bit, but we shouldn't overestimate that. Most complex system fails. Most civilizations in the history of humanity has failed. Gone, failed. Luckily back then, there were many civilizations or many possibilities of civilizations. Right now, we have more or less one civilization, and we are even more interdependent and interconnected. And we also have the capacity to destroy not just civilization, but more or less life on Earth. So the odds have never been greater. Am I sure that we will succeed? No, not at all. But does that diminish my hope and my will to still do something? No. I think that's the only thing we can do, even in the face of a possible collapse. We need to raise to the occasion and make as big contribution as we can. Not believing that we can manage, but perhaps lean into it.
I know we have at least
We have one
there,
person that's been waiting for quite some time.
Yes, but I just want to interject with one thing pertaining to this particular issue. Your first question there regarding we felt that it's sort of like we were left outside, we could not decide anything. You have to think also about sort of like there's always some kind of agency, and imagine a big city where there are traffic pilings and stuff like that, and people start honking their horns. That's the worst thing you can do. No one gets happier or anything gets better by everyone honking on the horns. But it's very easy today to sort of like complain about stuff and start hating stuff and so forth and spread that as ripples. And that's just have negative consequences. Another thing is also when I guess following the inner development goals, or if you're following a spiritual path, sort of like there are certain stages of awakening, or sort of like you can wake up, but you also need to clean up and you need to grow up and finally show up. And you have made the choice to show up, to actually not just log out and sort of like, oh, I can't do anything. It won't help anything, but sort of like, at least try to do that while you're spending time on this earth. The online questions.
I know that we are short of time. I just need to make one more comment, see, again, to not be misunderstood. So it says the world we create. It doesn't say the world I create, or it doesn't say the world you create. You should know that you are constantly creating the world. It says we, and that there is a reason for that as well, and that is that for many things we can use individual agency and do things. So certainly I and you can have an impact on the world. But perhaps the most important things that we need to do right now, when it comes to this collective shift, requires collective agency. And that is a agency that none of us individually can do, but we need to do it together. And not just because if we do it together, we are stronger. It's more than that. It's another dimension to exercise collective agency, because many of the things we need to shift are collective. Yes. For example, if we want to shift the market, I cannot do that. I can have the insight that the market is just a social construct, a random construct out there. But when I face the cashier at my local shop and I tell the cashier, you know, the market is just a social construct, money doesn't exist really, it's just that we believe in it.
She still want it.
Yeah, they still want the money. But the interesting thing is that very often we confuse our capacity for collective action in the way that the natural world we just need to accept. So even if the whole of humanity came together and said, we don't want to be dependent on oxygen any longer to breathe, we could do nothing about that. But if the whole of humanity came together, or even a majority in a nation state came together and said, we don't want to be dependent on money. Money could be gone tomorrow. But we need a collective decision. And many of the things that we have out there are these social contracts that we can change together. The sad thing is that we are often confusing the natural world and the socially constructed world in the way that we believe sometimes that, for example, the planetary boundaries, part of the natural world, that they are up for negotiation, that we can negotiate with nature. But the market forces we have to obey. And of course, the truth is the opposite. Mm-hmm. So there is an important thing there that, yes, individual agency, but collective agency. And our ability to exercise collective agency in the Western world has gone down the last 50 years. Gone down.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Ingela, now it's your turn. You've been waiting for a long time.
Yes, thank you. And what to add to this? Sorry for coming in at this point. While you're speaking, it's more of a stream of consciousness, reflection, and maybe sort of something bouncing into what is building up here as a collective reflection. But I think to start with on complexity and the importance of where we're coming from. I mean, for the last 3 weeks, and especially on Friday in Munich, we stepped into a world of absence. We saw on a large scale the disconnect from the closing the mind, closing the heart, and closing the will. It's the fist of the strong. It's my opportunity, my own worldview, and the battle between people that is in the center. And of course, as you have been telling all this evening, the capacity building, we have started that, but the interesting thing is how do we go forward in opening the mind, in opening the heart, and opening the will in terms of curiosity, compassion, and collaboration. So I think that is sort of the essence of the capacity building of today. And if we would have had 10 more years, we would have been had the collective ability to withstand these sort of shocks. Some of the thoughts that you're building on the interconnectedness, the we-ness and the we purpose sort of, I just wanted to reflect on that, and relating also to the question of complexity. What if we are complex creatures, and I'm leaning towards Nora Bateson's sort of thoughts about context and contextuality, saying that if we are inherent human, complexity is not a problem. The problem comes when we try to use knowledge, rational thinking, the reductionist sort of perspective, and especially the competitive individualistic worldview, and we try to describe a relational contextual world, and we try to describe that from the parts and rather the relational sort of texture of complexity, and that becomes even more complex. So my sort of maybe final just challenge or building out what you have been summarizing is, would the relating aspects be an entry point, like leaving the thoughts? We have been discussing knowledge and capacity building in some kind of like, we need to build skills of the mind. But my thought is rather, what if we went through, how do we care for the well-being of myself, each other, and the planet? Sort of the relational part as an entry point to the collective ability of action, to the new dimension of emergence that you are speaking about, to truly sort of open the mind of curiosity, the heart of compassion, and the will of collaboration, shifting to contextuality and how do we care, and the relating part.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with almost all of those comments. I just want to underscore two of the things you're saying there. One is that it's so important to understand again that in a complex system that you cannot describe the system by looking at the parts in a complex system. And again, as I said earlier, you cannot explain life from the chemistry. You need a new way of looking at this phenomenon of life, and then you get biology. Can't be reduced. So I totally agree on that. And then the second underscore is on the relating side. And I think I said something along the lines that increasing the odds of a positive emergence depends on the components of the system being able to relate in new or deeper ways. So for me, this is, when we're talking about capacity building, it's a little bit about meaning making and understanding the system, and a bit of knowledge. We can't completely disregard that. But the important thing is how we, as the components of the system, we humans, how we relate to each other, but also how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to the system, society, and eventually how we relate to nature and to the planet. So it is all about relational capacities. Luckily, we can build those relational capacities, and they have many components, and you mentioned a few of them, like understanding and compassion.
Thanks. I think we only have room for one more. Yes, sir.
There's a comment when you say relate. I'm wondering about to change it to resonant. I'm thinking of Hartman-Brosa's theory of resonant, that also would automatically not just refer to the intellect, but to the whole intelligence of also living bodies.
Yeah. Yes, of course. And again, that in all the different relating dimensions, that is true for relating to each other, certainly, yes, but also relating to ourselves. We don't do that mostly intellectual, or do we? No,
but to acknowledge that as a ground for.
Yeah, and then to society and to nature. So yeah, I can recommend Rosa. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a fan of it. And isn't that also cultivating listening hearts as a response to the democracy needs religion?
Yeah.
But in terms of not just religion as religion, but the message within religion, cultivating listening hearts. Beautiful.
Okay, Mr. Last question for the
wonderful talk. I have so many questions, but I'm trying to formulate my thoughts here. So there was a paper that came out last week that showed they did a blind study on responses from an AI therapist and a normal therapist, and by a large margin, it was the AI replies that were more empathic and more useful. And yeah, I have friends who use AI for therapy. They've started since last year maybe 1.5 years ago. So when you mention the word we create, you never mentioned let's get the help from AI.
Let's
Get the help from LLMs, actually. How about whether we consciously ourselves lean into them and leverage them, assuming that they want the good for us, not assume that, okay, they want their evil, they're gonna take over, they're gonna die and everything.
Yeah.
Have that faith.
Yeah.
Or maybe society
But also remember, before we added them, that we created them.
Well, there is a video online of a conversation with ChatGPT that ChatGPT claims that you didn't create me, you discovered me. If you think about quantum mechanics and so on, you just tuned into the frequency. So it could be that either we lean into it consciously, or like maybe society itself will eventually lean into it because they're developing trust. And somehow some of the conversation feels like the early days of smartphone.
We had a session on exactly that. Used to sort of online today and asked one of the questions. We had a session. Listen to that.
Yeah, we have the recording, so we.
Okay.
We use AI for good, so to speak.
A lot more. I mean, like.
Yeah, but we do it as a workshop, and you can listen to it.
It would be interesting to feed in.
And we should definitely use it more indeed.
Sorry?
We should definitely use it more against the meta crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, like with any tool, it's a tool. I totally buy into that we should use it, and I should modify my comment there, also saying that we created it, and of course we did. But I'm also very aware that the process that is going on within the AI world is also an emergent process, and I believe that it looks like that. Even the open AI people are surprised themselves about what is emerging in the systems as they put in more and more power into the models and more energy and run them longer and longer. Emergent things.
It could be they biased as well because they want to sell that. You know, at the end they need to generate money as well. So I'm a little bit suspicious about the claim by OpenAI, who, of course, it's positive for them to say that there's an emergent things from this token tumbler, I call it, because I don't really know many things, right?
No.
Things that comes up from the LLM can appear to me emergent, but it's there.
But I think the scary thing there is that nobody is in control. So even if we create them, it might be a little bit like the story tale about the sorcerer's apprentice that you saw in Disney, that recreating something that takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, because until I prove it, that I asked the LLM to do, hey, play chess, and then no, I don't want to play chess, because there has to be, the system has to, have this independent mindset. So otherwise, then it's like,
Actually, we need to wrap up. I want to say thank you to you, Thomas. Since we live in a world where everything seems to have the possibility of happening, maybe the inner development goals will appear in some pamphlet from the Chinese Communist Party in the future, who knows?
You're joking about that, and I hope it won't, but given the tradition in China of both the Confucianism and the Taoism, they have a focus on the inner world that we have not had the last 50 years.
Yeah. Thanks to the audience, both online as well as here. There is time now to still maybe a little bit to drink and snack on, and also continue the discussion. Thank you, everyone, for your very active engagement.
And thank you for all.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.